Welcome to the WakeUp Protocol. I am your host, Nadja Haldimann, and together we're having life-changing conversations with real people about spiritual awakening and the transformations that follow. We're mapping the messy path of awakening so you can go further faster and feel a little less alone along the way. For this week's episode of the WakeUp Protocol, I'm joined by Daniel Weiss, a coach, traveler, and lifelong seeker who's built a life anchored in purpose, integrity, and love. Daniel's awakening didn't arrive all at once. It unfolded over decades through encounters with strangers, sacred texts, and the quiet moments between reinventions. From heartbreak to solo adventures across the globe, he followed the breadcrumbs of the soul and learned to live by listening. In this conversation, Daniel shares how books like The Way of the Peaceful Warrior and time in Buddhist monasteries cracked him open and brought him home to himself. We talk about navigating life transitions, the meaning of courage, and how to walk through uncertainty with grace and curiosity. This episode is full of soul and a gentle reminder that the real journey is always inward. I hope Daniel's story lands exactly where you need it.
And I remember one evening walking onto the beach and hearing some English voices and just going over to a group of girls and chatting with them. It soon transpired that one of them was on a similar journey, that she'd had an awakening herself, and we became friends and stayed friends for years. Being able to share the experience, being able to talk about life, the universe, and everything. Maybe a week after I first read that book, I met that girl. She lived in Scotland, and we met another guy, a much older guy, and the three of us really powered up and talked. Her parents lived in a quarter of a castle in Scotland, so we stayed in this incredible castle and talked late into the evening. So just one thing led to another, which was a really nice solidification, I guess.
Daniel Weiss, welcome to the WakeUp Protocol.
Nadja, thank you. It's great to be here.
What a pleasure to reconnect with you and to talk to you here on this podcast. It's been about 20 years since we originally met through a Burning Man group of people that we both fell into and that really changed both of our lives in beautiful ways.
That's right. I can't believe it's 20 years, but that's how we met.
Yeah. And we reconnected more recently through LinkedIn again, because both of us have been active there. And I really enjoyed the conversations we used to have. And you're a Gemini. I think you have a Gemini moon, sun, and rising, right? Is that correct?
That's right. There's a lot of us in here.
Yeah. So Geminis are always so curious and such beautiful conversationalists. And it's been just such a pleasure talking with you then and reconnecting now. And I do know that you've had some real changes happen in your life, and I'm really excited to jump into that in this conversation here.
Likewise.
Yeah, and one of the things that you and I talked about in a conversation we had a while ago was that when people retire, they lose a little bit of their sense of purpose, that a lot of people really identify with their career. And when that career goes away, that sense of purpose goes away. And you said that you talked to, I can't remember if it was a nurse or a doctor or someone in the hospital who said that 95% of the people were there with a heart attack 3 months after retirement. Is that correct?
Yeah, so it was a former client of mine who, one of his directors used to be a senior nurse in a cardiology ward. And she told him that 95% of the people occupying the beds were men who had retired in the last 3 months. So they could have either had a massive heart attack or been recovering from surgery. And that was a real wake up for me that there's an issue there. And I've been exploring whether that's around purpose, identity, senior people driving themselves too hard in the lead up to retirement. So I found that fascinating and feel drawn to doing something to support in this area.
Yeah, I feel like that would be such an incredible area to support people in and helping them transition from that previous identity they had to having a meaningful, purposeful, joyful, vital continuation of their lives now that they don't have to work anymore, to be able to truly enjoy that.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree.
So Would you consider yourself an intuitive person?
Yes, I would definitely consider myself someone intuitive. I'm also really logical, and I think I overplay the logical, and in my quieter moments, allow myself to be intuitive. But I think I'm quite sort of logic dominant and have to almost remind myself to come back to center and find a balance to allow myself to be more intuitive.
Yeah, the reason I'm asking is because when we met, you were the very first person I had ever met who called themselves a life coach. And I know you were also an executive coach, business coach, career coach, but life coach was something I had truly never heard before. And I did pick up on that sense of maybe it's that place where the intuition and the intellect meet, because the way you talked about life and the way you talked about setting people up for success in a way that they can be more in alignment with their purpose was something that deeply resonated with me. And ever since you planted that seed in me, I was curious about it. It took me another 10 years to find my first life coach. And eventually I became a coach myself. And I'm curious how you got into life coaching in the first place.
That's a great question. I'm having to really think about that one. So I trained 20 years or so ago with a wonderful organization here in the UK called Noble Manhattan. And they had quite a holistic attitude towards their life and executive coaching training. So there was a real focus on intuition, a real focus on listening to oneself, really deeply listening to the coaching clients. And I think that organization had a really good balance between the fundamentals of coaching, the questioning and the listening, but also teaching us how to listen to what wasn't being said or listen to what was behind what was being said. So for me, that was part of my journey of personal development, of going on courses, of working with life coaches and human developers. That got me to a point of thinking, I really enjoy this. I can do it. I'm good at it. There's a need for it. And that got me into life coaching 20 or so years ago.
That's just so beautiful. You're such a pioneer in this work. And are there any specific examples you have of some major transformation that you helped create in people's lives through that work?
That question's just reminded me of a lovely lady that I worked with, again, must have been about 20 years ago. We met on a personal development course and we got chatting. And I told her that I was a relationship coach for quite a while. In my early times as a life coach, I worked with successful single women, typically in their sort of late 30s to early 40s, who had the career, had the life, often had quite a degree of success, but wanted to meet a man, wanted to have a relationship, settle down, have kids and so forth. And I met this lovely lady, I don't recall her name. And when I told her what I did, she said, right, I want to work with you. I'm completely committed to meeting my future husband by my 30th birthday. And I've always loved working with people who've got a crystal clear commitment. As a life coach or an executive coach or any kind of coach, a client with a crystal clear commitment, it makes it a joy and it makes my job a lot easier. And I said, okay, that sounds great. When's your 30th birthday? And she said, 3 weeks' time.
Quite an aggressive goal to work towards.
Yeah. So I took a deep breath and I said, right, well, it sounds as though you're committed to this. There's no point in me saying, let's speak once a month. We're going to have a coaching session twice a week, at least over the course of the next 3 weeks. I can't promise that we'll have a success, but I would do everything I can to support you. And I've never seen somebody be more committed, more focused. And just to give a bit of a sense, she re-engaged with past boyfriends. She went to dating events. This is before Tinder and whatever else, before online dating. It got to the point where she would chat to little old ladies on the bus and tell them that she wanted to meet her future husband. And a little old lady on the bus said, oh, you must meet my grandson. He's about your age. He lives near you. So she ended up having like 8 dates in the course of that 3 weeks, including a long-term ex-boyfriend and somebody that she worked with, I think. And it then got to the point where she was dating 2 or 3 guys, just platonic, but dating 2 or 3 guys. And it was going really well with each of them. We then had a final session. I said, right, you need to choose. You're dating 3 guys. It's time to choose. And she said, this is the one. And I can't honestly remember whether it was somebody that she'd met recently or a long-term ex-boyfriend or a long-term friend. And she ended up choosing that guy. We stayed in contact a little bit, but we lost contact a couple of months later. She contacted me 2 or 3 years later with an email with a picture of her holding a baby saying, I don't know if you remember me. I ended up getting married to that guy and here's our baby girl. Just so you know, this girl wouldn't be alive if it weren't for you. And it was just the most wonderful experience.
I love that story so much. Where there is a will, there is a way, and you just made it happen. That's so
I'd love to say that all coaching clients were that focused and committed. That isn't always the case, but she was 100% focused on this deadline and this goal, and she achieved it.
That's just so beautiful. I love that. Must have felt so good to be able to support her in that way.
It was amazing. I've probably still got that email tucked away somewhere in a special folder.
That's so nice. And it sounds like she really tapped into her manifestation. The way people talk about manifestations, the way we all try to do this is to align to a certain frequency, a certain vibration that we carry in ourselves. And as we're carrying that, we then attract that same energy. And it's something that I'm always thinking about. It's like, what do I want to attract in my life? What do I want to manifest in my life? And am I actually carrying the correct vibration? That's a vibrational match of what I want to attract in my life, be that work, be that health, be that relationship, be that anything that we want to manifest. How were you able to help her get to that higher state of frequency, that it was a match for what she was looking for?
So I think I acted as a tuning fork, helping her to really clarify what was important to her. And something for me that's always been really important, that I've always been really good at, I think, is clear communication. And I think that might come back to, we're talking star signs, that might be a Gemini thing. But for me, that clarity of focus, that clarity of communication has always been hugely important. So we probably spent the first 2 or 3 coaching sessions just getting her crystal clear what she was looking for, not just in a man, but in a relationship and in a partnership, so that when it showed up, she'd recognize it instantly. And my role there was just as a tuning fork or a catalyst or a clarifier to help her get that clarity in her life. And then from that moment on, it was about her just going out and talking to people and sharing with people this amazing 3-week adventure that she was on.
Wow, that's so beautiful to have somebody like you to really help tune that. And it sounds like you've tuned yourself in many ways too, and gone through many iterations to really go from a previous version of yourself that was maybe a little bit more asleep to a more awakened person. And you shared with me a little bit how you were in college and then ended up going to south of France. Is that correct? I would love to hear what your awakening experience was, where you started out and then what happened and how you started thinking of life in a different way.
Yeah, with pleasure. So I studied French and marketing at university. I didn't particularly enjoy university. I studied in London and I was very short of money. I was working my way through university and didn't really get the full university experience. I also chose my university based on being close to my girlfriend at the time. And then 6 months into university, we broke up. So I got to my second year of university and was just ready to leave, I wasn't going to drop out, but I wasn't enjoying my university experience. And I was fortunate that my grades were good enough that I was able to skip what should have been a sandwich year. Year 3 should have been a year in France, working in a university as an English teacher as a way to become fluent in French myself. My grades were good enough that my lecturer allowed me to jump the 3rd year and go straight into my 4th year. What I knew I needed to do was still spend a meaningful amount of time in France. So I spent 6 or 7 weeks hitchhiking through France on my own, a rucksack and my thumb. I got the ferry across to Calais and hitchhiked right the way down to the south of France, and stayed in Nice on the French Riviera, and stayed in what we'd now call an Airbnb, but just stayed at somebody's house. And a girl who was also staying there, who I palled up with, gave me a copy of this book called The Way of the Peaceful Warrior by Dan Milne. And I didn't know it at the time, but it was very much a gateway book, very much a sort of spiritual awakening book. And I read it and something just switched on inside me. And I must have read it 5 times back to back over the course of the next week or two that I was there. And for the rest of that trip, I just met the right people and synchronicities happened. And I ran out of money. And then the next day I managed to get some work grape picking and I had nowhere to stay and bumped into some people and they said, oh, you can stay with us. And just so many synchronicities just came out of nowhere. And I think that was a really pivotal, that was a real before and after moment for me. Travel has always been a really important part of my life. And it happened when I was relaxed, traveling in the sunshine.
Yeah, I read that book myself, The Way of the Peaceful Warrior. And what specific parts of the book do you feel influenced your experience that you went through?
Oh my goodness. It's 32 years ago that I read it. I struggle to remember exactly. But I think the things that I do remember, because I read a few more of his books, there was one called No Ordinary Moments. And that was a line in the original book. You may remember that Socrates, who was Dan's mentor and guide in the book, asked him to meditate and come back to him when he had something of value. Dan spent the whole day meditating, couldn't think of anything, but got himself to a really relaxed point and then just couldn't think of anything and gave up and went to get dressed, put his trousers on and accidentally put both legs in one leg of the trousers and then fell over and found that hilarious. And he realized it's because he'd stopped being present, stopped focusing. And that gave him the realization that there are no ordinary moments. And for me, that's a call to presence. That's the call to being here now and enjoying this conversation, not thinking about what's happening tomorrow or what happened yesterday.
Yeah, really stepping into that present moment. That's what it was for me when I had my first awakening, which happened at Burning Man, where I really, truly stepped into the present moment. And for me, it was the book, The Power of Now by Eckhart Tolle, that gave me the information, but I couldn't really understand it until I felt it. And once I was in that present moment, I was like, wow, that's it right now. And that's the only thing that actually matters. And that really made me change everything I thought about life. So could you go into some of the stories that put you into that present moment as you went through that journey?
Yeah. So I guess the first thing that happened after I read the book, and the chronology is a little bit vague because, like I said, it was 32 years ago, but I traveled across the south coast of France, all hitchhiking. And I made it down to this lovely little beach town called Argelès-sur-Mer in the Languedoc region, almost down towards Spain, that far southwest. And I remember one evening just walking onto the beach and hearing some English voices and just going over to a group of girls and just sitting and chatting with them. And it soon transpired that one of them was on a similar journey, that she'd had an awakening herself. And we just became friends and we stayed friends for years after that. And it was just so wonderful and looking back, so important to almost sort of solidify that experience by meeting somebody, being able to share the experience, being able to talk about life, the universe and everything, maybe a week after I first read that book. And I don't think the book would have been so meaningful and impactful if I hadn't then met that girl. She lived in Scotland and we met another guy, a much older guy, and the three of us really powered up and talked and talked. Her parents lived in a quarter of a castle in Scotland, so we stayed in this incredible castle and just talked late into the evening. So just one thing led to another, which was a really nice solidification, I guess, of something which was quite conceptual when I first read it.
Yeah, that's so beautiful. I know of a lot of people who have spent a year traveling either through Europe or Southeast Asia or India, USA, depending where they're coming from, like going to a different continent and experiencing a different culture and getting out of the known world and experiencing something so different that it makes them rethink all the patterns and the programming that they came from. Do you feel like that's what happened to you in that time?
I do. I have lived abroad. So I did an academic year in America when I was 18 years old. I wasn't so lucky with that in that I lived with a very, very strict religious family. So I didn't have the free experience that I was hoping for in America. It was a much stricter experience than I was anticipating. But after I had worked as a life coach for some time, it occurred to me that I was supporting people to live their dreams, but actually my dream was to travel. So I took 6 months off and did a lap of the world, did a full 24,000-mile lap of the world, and all the places I wanted to visit pretty much were on a straight line around the world.
Wow.
So I got this wonderful ticket through Trail Finders that allowed me something like 12 different stops around the world. And I went everywhere I wanted to. So I went to Thailand, Japan, China, Hawaii, all through America, and actually ended up, my last couple of weeks, I was at Burning Man. So that was a lovely way to end my 6 months of travel. But that was definitely a hugely important experience for me.
Mm-hmm. And how would you say that impacted you?
One small thing, which may not be small, before I went, everyone called me Danny, and I called myself Danny. And when I came back, I was Daniel. And even though that sounds small and insignificant, to me, it was a sort of, Danny is an American kid chewing gum. Daniel is a professional man. That was the sort of before and after moment for me again. So there was a sort of boy to man moment, I think, that I achieved through that 6 months of complete self-reliance, being in countries where China, this was 20 years ago, people didn't speak English. This was pre the Beijing Olympics. So English wasn't widely spoken. So I had to get by for 3 weeks in a language where I could say hello and thank you, but that was about all I had. So there was a real self-reliance element to it. And Burning Man, of course, one of the principles of Burning Man is radical self-reliance. So that was a real wonderful way to end that self-reliance journey.
Yeah, that sounds so powerful to end everything at Burning Man. And I think that's where we met, right? During that time.
That's right. That's right.
That's 20-ish years ago.
Amazing.
And what's really coming up for me when you're saying that is we no longer have these traditions, the rite of passage. That we used to have, that the Native Americans still have, that the Jewish culture still has. And for some reason in the Western culture, we just kind of lost it. And we go on from one day to the next until we eventually get old. And there is not that clear, okay, right now you're a child and you're supposed to be playing. And now you're going to be learning these things. And now you're going to become an adult, and this is what it means, and we're going to start looking at you differently, and we're going to treat you differently. And so when we don't have that, it can be really disorienting, and it almost sounds like you put yourself into a situation where you created that for yourself because it wasn't given to you in the culture. Would you say that I'm understanding this correctly?
Absolutely. And from 11 years old, I was brought up by my mum. So she did a brilliant job, but I didn't really have that daily father figure. My dad was around. I saw him at the weekends, but I didn't really feel like I had that sort of daily father figure. So there was an element of going to university was quite a big deal, moving from my seaside town in Bournemouth, moving up to the big city in London. Going away to France for 6 weeks was a big deal. And then probably the biggest deal was the 6 months traveling. And then I came back from my travels probably only for about 2 or 3 years. And then I moved to Perth in Western Australia for 6 months. So I've often wanted to just experience completely different cultures. And I think I know myself best when I'm out of my usual culture and out of my usual routine and rhythm.
As you're sharing all of this, 2 tarot cards are coming up for me. I love the tarot. I really love it for understanding concepts, life concepts, and reframing situations. And so as I'm hearing this, the first card that comes up is the Fool. And the Fool is the guy who's holding his little pack on a stick on his back and head up in the air, and he's just going for it. And he's actually getting towards a cliff, and he might jump off. But what happens when you jump off? Maybe you grow wings, and maybe something amazing is happening. And then that feels like that's younger Danny who is going out there on his journey and really starting that exploring of what life holds for him. And then the next one I'm seeing is the Chariot, which is the number 7 in the Major Arcana. And it's going out there and plowing a new path and knowing that there might be rocks or pebbles on the way and going away from the known into something new, into something unknown, but from a place of heart. It comes from the heart, not from the mind. It's like, what is guiding me to step into that new version of myself, and what's calling me? And it's, again, that intuition. What does my intuition say about I'm needing to do, and trusting that and following those steps? And it sounds like it really brought you into the person that you are today, and really helping people, guiding people through transitions, transformations. And as we say in coaching, right, you can only take a client as far as you are. And so having had those experiences sounds like it's really important.
I think so. And particularly my travels, I think, have been a really important part of my journey. And if for no other reason, when I'm working either with a client in my recruitment business or working with a coaching client, it just gives me such a deep well to pull on. It just gives me so much material that I can talk about. Oh, when I was in Tokyo, when I went to Hangzhou in China. And I think if I'd only ever lived in my hometown, I wouldn't be able to share, and I wouldn't be able to give examples, and I wouldn't be able to work with clients from all over the world as well.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. We have talked about your experiences and how you were going through some spiritual awakenings from a previous version of yourself to a more open, more present version of yourself. If you had to define spiritual awakening, what would you say?
I met a guy in my hometown, and I must have been maybe 20 years old. So this was just before I went to France. And he didn't strike me at the time as being particularly spiritual. Not that I really knew what that meant at the time, but I remember him saying to me, and I'll probably misquote this, "Namyo Horenge Kyo," which I now know means, if it is to be, it is up to me. Mm-hmm. And I think that, again, we've talked a bit about self-reliance, but that to me speaks of self-responsibility, of owning responsibility for my own life, for the good I've done, for the bad I've done, for the mistakes I've made, from what has happened that's led me up to this present moment. So that, if it is to be, it is up to me, reminds me that it's up to me, reminds me that I'm responsible for my own life. And I mean responsible in a way of saying I'm able to respond. I've got the freedom and the ability to create my life.
Yeah, that sounds really powerful, to take full responsibility of your life. What comes up for me is it's not being a victim, but being in charge. Saying, absolutely, okay, this is happening to me. I'm taking responsibility for it. And I have the tools to now navigate myself out of this into a state that feels in alignment again.
Absolutely. And I'd be lying if I said that that is my 100% way of being and state. It isn't. I'm married with 2 young children, so I often fall out of alignment. But I do now feel that I've got a tool set, which includes meditating, which includes journaling, which includes breathing, which includes going for a nice long walk in the park, which helps me to find that balance and helps me to get recentered.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and those tools are so important. And a lot of people are talking about meditating and journaling, gratitude journal. Can you go a little bit more into what exactly your tools look like, just for our audience to hear?
Yeah, so the meditation, 18 or so years ago, something like that, I went on a course which was called Ashaya's Ascension. And it's a type of meditation where you just say a number of different phrases on repeat. And it's just a way of getting really relaxed and really present and really centered. So I do that, not every day, but I probably do that several times a week. And it's a really nice way to calm down. It's a nice way to get centered. It's a nice way to just drift off to sleep. So that's something that's been present in my life for the best part of 20 years.
And how often do you do that meditation? For how long, and where do you do it?
So the ideal way of doing it, from my understanding, would be to sort of get up in the morning, sit in a chair and do it for 20 minutes. That was how I was taught to do it. Mm-hmm. The reality is I'm much more likely to do it when I've maybe had 1 too many cups of coffee and I can't get to sleep. That will be a way that I can sort of calm myself down and slow down. So I do it probably a bit more reactively than proactively, but I probably do, realistically, I probably do 10 minutes 3 times a week. And I know that I would benefit more if I did it for longer, more frequently. But I think that for me is maybe not quite enough, but for me, it's something. It's part of my practice.
And how do you notice if it does something for you or not? Like, let's say you don't do it for a while and you do it. Do you notice a change? And if so, what does that look like?
It's really subtle, and to the point where I've had times where I thought, is this really working? And I've allowed myself to say, just do it, just trust the practice, just do it. So in some ways, I think doing it and trusting that it's working on some level is more important than me being able to say, oh, I felt stressed and now I don't, or I couldn't get to sleep and now I can. So I think this is something that it may be that it takes 20 years to see the benefits. I trust the process enough to carry on doing it for those 20 years.
Sounds like you're definitely getting something out of it, or else you would not continue it.
Absolutely. So if nothing else, I've got the discipline to keep doing it.
Yeah. I used to meditate for quite a few years on a regular basis, and then I stopped a few years ago and didn't do it anymore, didn't feel like getting back into it. And recently, over the last few months, I started getting back into it. And I'm really noticing a big, big difference, how much more calm I am, how much more present I am, how things, if they rattle me for much less time, and I can catch myself rather than becoming the victim of it and getting stuck in it for minutes, hours, days. I'm like, oh, hold on a second. Okay, so this is happening. And what it does for me is it allows me to step outside of myself and become the observer and go like, okay, so this is happening, and it doesn't necessarily have to be its fullest truth. There is another possibility. And then I get to kind of take a breath and figure out how else I want to experience life from that moment on. And you were saying, right, you wish you were in it all the time and you're not. I don't actually think life is about being in it all the time. Yeah. It's about recognizing when we're not and course correcting in that moment.
Absolutely. And I mentioned journaling as well. And again, probably 20 plus years ago, I read The Artist's Way by Julia Cameron. Mm-hmm. And one of the tools in that is writing 3 pages stream of consciousness every morning. I did that for years and years and years. And I probably write a page most days of A4, takes about 15, 20 minutes. And some days I'll write 2 or 3 pages. But that's probably been the most important thing that I've done for my spiritual journey, is writing and journaling. And if I don't know what to write, I'll start with, I don't know what to write. I'm just going to keep writing. I will literally write that. But often within the first page, my head will be clear. And if I make the time to write 3 pages, there'll be some insights, there'll be some actions. I'll think of somebody that I need to call and I'll call them. So that's been a hugely important part of my journey.
Yeah, journaling. What does it actually do?
For me, what I think it does is it gives a voice to my subconscious. The first page, I might be writing that from ego. And then I get into the flow and I just allow myself to write whatever it is that's coming through. And I'm not saying therefore I'm channeling. I don't think it's on that level at all. Maybe it is, but that isn't my experience of it. But I allow myself to write whatever comes up. And that sort of stream of consciousness without the filter of ego, I think that's a really important thing. And I'll often go back and read what I've written, and then I'll underline anything that I think is either an insight or an action. If it's an insight, I might explore it. If it's an action, I'll put it on my action list and do it.
That makes a lot of sense. Thanks for explaining that. I'm still struggling a little bit with the journaling thing. I do it on and off. I'm like, what am I saying? Am I just like recapping my last day, or am I actually manifesting something for the future? Or is it both? For me, it's just about allowing the subconscious to come out. And once it's out, maybe it can help the process and move on.
And I think that word process is really important. And I think if I get a very different experience from it, if I write at the end of the day, it becomes more of a diary and more of processing what has happened in the day. And maybe I sleep better because my brain doesn't have to untangle it all through my dreams. If I write it in the morning, it's a very different experience because I haven't got the day to be able to have written the diary about. So I think when I do it properly, I wake up and have a glass of water, maybe have some breakfast, and then I'm writing within 15 minutes of waking up. And that's a very different experience. And Julia Cameron actually calls it morning pages specifically because they're designed to be done first thing.
Yeah. So you said meditation, journaling. What other tools are you using?
I'm very lucky that my daughters go to school, or one's about to change school, but they have been going to school right near a really nice park with a river running through it and a woods next to it. So what I typically do, unless it's completely pouring with rain, I'll drop them off at school and go for a half an hour to 45-minute walk around the park. And then I can do that and I can get home by 9:30 ready for my day. So that's a really good way of not just getting my steps in, but also nature bathing and going for a really nice walk a few meters away from a lovely little babbling brook that goes through the park.
And I just kind of envision you in London walking through a park. It sounds so beautiful. I love
It's
London.
nice.
It's such a beautiful city. So we talked about how we can go into these moments of awakened states and then we fall back out of it. Would you say that once you've had that experience, it was lasting, or what did that look like for you?
So there have definitely been some peak moments for me, and most of them have been when I've been traveling. That just seems to be where I'm in my happy place. And I still aspire to moving to Provence in the south of France. I haven't got much agreement from my immediate family to do so, but that's still my exit strategy in the next 10 years or so. But I think in terms of sort of staying in that state, one thing I found is quite a lot of my family and friends, my nearest and dearest, wouldn't mind me saying this, they're atheists. So what I haven't yet done, and this is on me, I haven't yet found or created a group of people that are on a similar journey to me. So the next step for me is to plug into a community. Here in London would be easiest, but with the wonders of the internet, it needn't be. It could be dispersed across the world. But I think having that community of like-minded people is probably the next step for me in terms of having a place to go to recharge.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And a lot of people talk about the difference between spirituality and religion. And it almost always sounds like the awakening kind of gives people a bigger perspective than the religion that they were part of. And it's almost like they're seeing all the religions now as just part of the teachers that help us understand how to become a higher version of ourselves. And it's no longer about the exact teachings of the exact religions. And community, of course, is a huge part of it. And having like-minded people to have these conversations with, which I'm very lucky to have these conversations here on this podcast with so many people that are open and willing, like you. Thank you so much for sharing your journey. So you are a executive coach, and you specifically are working with senior executives who are about to retire and to really help them find more purpose, more joy, more vitality, more meaning in their lives. And I would like to give you a chance to tell our audience what it is you do and how they can find you.
Yeah, thank you. Senior executives, probably 2 or 3 years away from retirement, or in that last part of their careers, who are looking to the next step. And the areas that I focus on are health and longevity, because I think it's incredibly important. If people want to live a long and healthy life, they need to put some time, energy, and focus into their health and longevity. The next part is purpose and identity, because for so many of us, the work that we do, whether that's employed or running our own business, for so many of us, we identify with, I am the chief executive, I am the director of finance, or whatever that particular role might be. And then one day that won't be the case. So they'll retire and they won't be a chief exec or director. So really looking at how they can create a purpose and an identity that will last them for the next 30, 40 years, or however long that retired chapter might be. And I think a really important part is fun and adventure. I think a lot of people, myself included, when I think about retirement, I don't think about a comfy pair of slippers watching daytime television. I'm thinking about traveling. I'm thinking about living abroad. I'm thinking about spending time with loved ones, continuing to do some form of work, whether that's volunteering or being a trustee of a charity. So really working with senior people to have that conversation 2 years before they retire, rather than having that conversation 6 months after they've retired, I think it's a really important piece, working with people who are approaching retirement, talking about what that next step will look like for them.
What beautiful work to help these people step into an incredible few more years, ideally decades of healthy, vibrant, inspired living. I'm so glad you're doing that.
Thanks.
As we're coming to an end of this conversation, I have one final question for you. If you could go back in time and give a message to a younger version of yourself, to the Danny that you were talking about, what would you tell him?
That's a great question. It's a really hard one, because so many of the things that I would have done back then, if I did them, I wouldn't be married to my wonderful wife and I wouldn't have my 2 little kids. So I wouldn't tell them to do anything differently, because I believe in the butterfly effect. I think I'd tell him to worry less and enjoy it more.
Worry less and enjoy it more. I'm really feeling that. What a beautiful message. And so it is. Daniel, thank you so much for your generous time, for opening yourself up and telling your story. And yeah, I feel inspired. Thank you.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you so much for tuning into the Wake Up Protocol. If you like what you heard, share this episode with 3 people who need to hear this message. And if you want to go deeper, head to thewakeupprotocol.com and sign up for our email list. That's where we share behind the scenes insights, bonus resources, exclusive invites, and the kind of guidance we only send to our community. And if this is the last thing you hear from us, all we'd like to say is keep going, trust yourself, follow your heart. Until next time, have a safe and happy journey.